Chapter 1: The Spark of Radical Reform. Europe in the early 1500s was a continent ablaze with religious upheaval, where ancient certainties crumbled like parchment in flames. From Wittenberg's university halls to England's manor houses, reformers wielded scripture like a sword against Rome's thousand-year dominion. Yet even among these revolutionaries, some dared to push further into uncharted theological waters. In Zurich's narrow cobbled streets, Huldrych Zwingli's candlelit discussions had already shattered the old mass and torn down painted saints. Yet his young disciples, Conrad Grebel with his scholar's intensity, Felix Manz with his Hebrew scrolls, pressed deeper questions that caused their mentor's brow to furrow. Why strip away infant baptism when Scripture spoke only of believers descending into Jordan's waters? Night after night, these earnest souls hunted through apostolic examples, their oil lamps flickering in the dim light. With ink-stained fingers, they traced Paul's letters, each passage whispering the same radical truth. Baptism belonged to those who could confess faith for themselves. But as they turned the pages, a growing unrest stirred within them. What would this revelation mean for their beliefs? The implications were about to shake the very foundation of Zurich's reformed community. Little did they know, the discovery that lay ahead would change everything. Through 1524, the debates in Zwingli's oak-panelled study grew increasingly heated as theological thunderclouds gathered each week. The reformer's mahogany desk bore witness to countless hours spent wrestling with Scripture, its polished surface scarred by the urgency of ink-stained fingers tracing biblical passages. What had begun as gentle, scholarly discourse now crackled with the tension of men convinced they held eternal truth. As autumn leaves spiraled down along the banks of the Limmat, Zwingli's hesitation deepened, overshadowed by the unwavering resolve of Grebel and Manz, who had drawn a hard line. Tension crackled in the air, and storm clouds gathered ominously throughout 1524. Little did they know, in January 1525, a tempest was about to erupt, one that would forever alter the course of the Reformation. What decisive actions would unfold, and who would emerge unscathed from the chaos? On the bitter winter night of January 21st, 1525, a handful of men gathered in the modest Manz family home on Stussihofstadt, their breath visible in the frigid air. Candlelight danced across weathered walls as these reformers prepared to cross a theological Rubicon from which there could be no return. The very stones seemed to hold their breath, sensing the gravity of what was about to unfold. George Blaurock, the former priest with calloused hands and burning eyes, knelt before his brothers in hushed urgency. Around him, shadows flickered as Conrad Grebel lifted a simple earthenware pitcher, its contents catching the amber glow of tallow flames. Could any of them have imagined that this humble vessel would hold water destined to wash away centuries of tradition? Upon thy confession of faith, Grebel's voice rang with quiet authority as he poured the water over Blaurock's bowed head. The droplets fell like liquid starlight in the candlelit chamber, each one a declaration that baptism belonged to believers alone. In that sacred moment, the first Anabaptist baptism in the Swiss Reformation was complete. The brothers baptized each other individually, and their spiritual Rubicon was definitively crossed as water dripped onto worn wooden floors. Felix Manz, Conrad Grebel, and others stepped forward to receive the ordinance they believed Christ had commanded for his followers. The die was cast, the ancient practice reborn in apostolic simplicity. Within days, whispers of their audacious act echoed through the narrow streets of Zurich, stirring unrest among its citizens. The city council convened, tension palpable in the air as they stared into the unknown. Had these men, in their reckless ambition, truly undermined the foundation of Christendom? Or was this just the beginning of something far more perilous? The fate of their beliefs, and perhaps their lives, hung in the balance, leaving everyone to wonder what would happen next. By March 1525, Zurich's council had found its voice, issuing a stern edict that would seal the fate of many. If any person shall henceforth baptize another, he that baptizeth and he that is baptized shall be drowned without mercy. The quill strokes that formed these words carried the weight of empire, transforming theological conviction into a capital crime. What had begun as scholarly debate now bore the stark reality of life and death. Arrests followed swiftly, casting long shadows over the growing Anabaptist circle as mounting pressure threatened to crush their nascent movement. Prison walls echoed with hymns and prayers as believers faced the terrible choice between recantation and martyrdom. Yet their resolve only seemed to deepen with each passing month, watered by persecution as a garden thrives under storm clouds. On January 5th, 1527, Felix Manz was led through Zurich's cobbled streets toward the icy waters of the Limmat, his final journey watched by both sympathetic and hostile crowds. The brilliant Hebrew scholar who had once traced scripture by lamplight now faced the ultimate test of his convictions. Winter's grip had turned the river into a mirror of death, its surface reflecting the grey January sky. The Martyrs Mirror records, he went forward with a joyful countenance and said that he thanked God that he could die for his truth. As the executioner's boat pushed into the current, Manz's final testimony rang across the water. I have lived for Christ's truth, and today I die for it gladly. The scholar's voice carried over the Limmat's rushing waters, each word a defiant proclamation that earthly powers could not silence heavenly conviction. Though Manz's drowning shook the Anabaptist community, it paradoxically emboldened them, igniting a fire of conviction amidst the storm. Yet, as they pondered, could the waters of persecution truly extinguish beliefs forged in Scripture and tempered by suffering? Or was this just the beginning of a deeper struggle that would test their faith in unimaginable ways? In the wake of Manz's execution, Swiss believers scattered like seeds on the wind, carrying their radical faith to the Low Countries and the rolling hills of Moravia. This post-execution diaspora transformed persecution into proliferation, as hunted disciples became traveling evangelists in foreign lands. What tyrants meant for destruction became the very instrument of the movement's expansion across Europe's spiritual landscape. From these scattered seeds grew mighty trees. Menno Simon's gentle leadership birthed the Mennonites in the Netherlands, while Jacob Hutter's followers embraced radical economic sharing in Moravian communities. Each group bore the distinctive marks of that candlelit gathering in Zurich, voluntary faith replacing inherited tradition, adult baptism symbolizing conscious choice, and pacifist discipleship echoing Christ's Sermon on the Mount. The core principles hammered out in Zwingli's oak-panelled study became the foundation stones of enduring communities. Voluntary faith meant that each believer must choose Christ for themselves, rejecting the comfortable assumption of inherited Christianity. Adult baptism served as the visible sign of this personal decision, while pacifist discipleship demanded that followers of the Prince of Peace renounce violence even unto death. 5 centuries later, their spiritual descendants, the Mennonites, Amish, and Brethren communities, continue to bear witness to these ancient convictions in modern contexts. From Pennsylvania's rolling farmland to urban service centers, these communities are committed to simple living, mutual aid, and peaceful conflict resolution. Their horse-drawn buggies and plain dress serve as living reminders of alternative ways of following Christ. Why does a simple kitchen table baptism performed on a winter night in 1525 still stir hearts 5 centuries later? Perhaps because it reminds us that authentic faith requires costly choices, demanding that every generation decide whether to embrace comfortable conformity or costly discipleship. And so our tale of kitchen table courage comes full circle. What began as a handful of scholars kneeling by candlelight in Felix Manz's modest home has grown into communities spanning continents and centuries. The Anabaptist witness reminds us that genuine faith often demands a costly step beyond the familiar, not the inherited certainties of childhood, but an adult's deliberate decision to follow a higher call, whatever the price. Today, Those echoes live on in congregations that prize simplicity over success, peace over power, and mutual care above individual gain. From Amish barns raised by willing hands to Mennonite disaster relief flowing toward the world's forgotten corners, their witness continues challenging our age of comfort and compromise. If their story moves you, perhaps there's a conviction stirring in your own heart, a choice you're called to make for the sake of something greater than yourself. The water still waits, the candles still flicker, and the call to costly discipleship still beckons across the centuries. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the birth of the Anabaptists. If this story of radical faith has stirred you, please like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments which chapter of their remarkable history we should bring to life next.